Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Hey, thank you for joining us here today. We're here talking about guidelines on reopening churches in California. I'm Charlie Cutler. I'm here at Church West, and I've got Dave Bloodgood with me. Not sure if many of you have met Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hey, how's it doing? Good morning.
Hey, thanks. Dave, he leads our outside team here at Church West, and he's also part of his church security team, so he's been dealing with a lot of this as well. So Dave has joined me on the webinar today, and he's got some experience going through this as well. I want to kind of first tell you that we've had a lot of people have been talking ever since, what was it, the 17th? Is that the date that things shut down, or the 19th? Yeah, the 19th of March was the stay-at-home order. And so starting on that day, everybody was saying, well, when we reopen, what's it going to look like? And so we sat from March 19th through May 25th speculating on what it was going to look like here in California. And there was a lot of material that was out there. And we waited until May 25th, once we got the governor's guidelines here in California. And that's what we based all of this on today, is what we're supposed to be doing in California. What it isn't is it's not going to be city specific or county specific. San Francisco is going to be different than LA. That's going to be different than Modesto. So just take that into consideration as we go here. Here's a little disclaimer, if I can. All right, it's a resource. You know, we're going to tell you it's not legal advice. We're relying on you to take common sense approach to this. You know your facility, you know your congregation, you know your abilities, and so we want you to open this at a time that you feel is right. Reopen church at a time that is right for you. So this isn't legal guidance, and if you need legal help, you know, a lot of the attorneys right now, they're real hesitant to give advice either, because none of this has been tested. This is all you know, relatively new. So a lot of them are going to be, you know, it's a little bit of a reach to ask attorneys to give you advice. Okay. What we'll be doing afterwards, we'll send you a model plan. We'll send you additional resources as well. And then a recording of this webinar, and then we'll probably be following up soon after. So we've kind of broken it down to 10 steps, and just kind of the steps, what you do just as you begin to plan, all the way through to the end of your first worship service, and then how to kind of recap. And so the written plan also includes all of this information as well. I'll tell you, the approach that we're taking in this situation is we're taking the approach of assume that somebody that's going to come to church is infected with coronavirus or COVID-19, and just assume that they are in attendance. And then also assume that somebody that's in attendance is at higher risk, that if they caught it, it would be detrimental and it would be a severe case. And so we felt that if we could take that approach, then we're using best practices. And I want to tell you that, you know, we've had a number of churches that have reopened, some prior to May 25th, some after May 25th, that have had notices where they get a call on Tuesday and somebody calls up and says, hey, I just got a positive diagnosis. And then you want to be able to have a plan in place to respond to that. So I do want to show you what one church did. I don't think that sound is going to come through, but I'm going to play it. This is a church that said, hey, we want to reopen. They've got a sanctuary that seats about 3,900 people. And so it's a big sanctuary. And then what they did is they put it together where they could have 100 people in the sanctuary. They had 100 people outside, sitting outside, and then they had 100 people in another facility there. So they had 300 people meeting on their church campus. So you can see everybody was masked. People had a reservation. They took a temperature as people entered into the facility. And then you can see how they had it all spaced out across. Let me pause this for just a second, because if you notice here, they also had plastic bags that were going over each one of the seats. And that was because they had multiple services going on that day, and it was a quick turnaround between services. They were still cleaning, but this was a quicker way to clean. And so they were able to do that. Some people were asking if this was required. It's not something that's required, but it is something that you can consider and see if it's a good fit for your church. Everybody had masks. A lot of the ushers, greeters were kind of encouraging people to, stay socially distant. And it's hard when you go into church. You're going to want to go in there and give people a hug. And, it's really cool. But people here on the stage, they were more than 20 feet away. Let me go back just a little bit. You'll receive this video. They were more than 20 feet away when they didn't have a mask on. Everybody else had a mask on. Once they were done speaking, they'd put the mask on. I was here at this church service, and I've always been like, I'm fine, watching church online. But hey, it is different, going back. It was a very emotional experience for a lot of people. And I know why. There's a reason why people really want to go back to church. See how they did the cleanup? Everything was wiped down, removed the bags, and they did a good job. So I think that this really helped me to see them do it in person and to kind of help put together some practices. I hope that video is helpful to you as well. So these are the guidelines through June 21st. As of June 21st, Governor Newsom is going to reevaluate where we are on contact tracing, where we are on infections, where we are on a lot of different things. But between now and the 21st, they're requiring 25% of occupancy or 100 attendees. And depending on the region, some people will say it's 100 attendees plus volunteers, and other areas are saying it's 100 attendees including your volunteers. My thought is I'd keep it under 100 total that you had in the facility. Then these are the different things that we want to do, which is kind of the basic of it: the physical distancing, face coverings, things along those lines. Still no Sunday school, still no in-person youth group or child care. Schools, cafe, bookstores, things like that are still not part of the reopening plan here in California quite yet. This is a big question. People are asking constantly, are we covered? I just want to tell you, insurance companies don't say you're covered before the incident happens. They've given you a policy, and the insurance policy is going to kind of give you the terms of everything. But so nobody's going to come out and say, you're covered for this or you're covered for that, because that hasn't happened yet. That incident hasn't happened yet. I will tell you that it's designed to cover you against negligence, bodily injury, sickness, lawsuits, the cost of litigation. If there was somebody that contracted coronavirus, could there be litigation? There could be, and I think that's what insurance coverage is meant to respond to. But again, actual coverage is determined at the time of loss based on the policy, no matter what insurance company you're with. But generally speaking, I think we're in pretty good shape to kind of reopen churches. I'll tell you what's excluded. What's excluded if something is expected, directed, intended by the church, willful, wanton, malicious act. If you did something blatant, if we did something right now and you were putting somebody and you were being grossly negligent, putting somebody in harm's way, that's something that I think that at the end it's indefensible. And so we just want to take care of our congregation and develop our best practices here. Okay. All right. This is another question. Can we get a waiver? There's been a bunch of waivers that are out there, and there's your waiver right there. Write it quickly. No, I'm kidding. We're going to send this out to you. But I want to tell you a little bit about a waiver. First of all, we're going to send you the sample. The issue with a waiver is that it must be well drafted and unambiguous. And some of the models that we've seen out there, people have come up with something. They've been a little bit ambiguous. And the reason why is because they're new. They haven't been interpreted by the courts yet, so people don't know what to say. So they're putting something very broad out there. We have one that is specific to this. It hasn't been tested by the courts. It's a model for you. It's up to you whether or not you feel it's important for your church to do it. It's not an insurance requirement. It's not a state requirement. It's just that a number of people have been receiving them, or have been requesting them, or coming up with some. And I think that it's just important that you have a good resource for you. If you feel like your ministry is best served by having a waiver, use the one that we send you. You can tweak it a little bit, put the church name in there. Keep it in 12-point font. I know that seems weird, but that's the font that the state of California says for a waiver. It's got to be in a 12-point font. Okay. So now let's form our reopening team. This is your worship team, the people that are involved in worship services, setting up your facilities, and on staff. And then you want to look at some of the congregants that you have that have skill sets: a doctor, a nurse, attorney, somebody that's also reopened maybe their business or something like that. And so, there are people that are reopening their businesses and they've gone through this process as well. And so it might be good to have them on the team. I would also let local law enforcement know. Local law enforcement here in California specifically, they recognize that churches can be a target for things. And so they do more patrols around churches on Sundays. And if you haven't had church going on for a couple of months, then they may not have been doing patrols. I also want to say that we've had some churches that have reopened and there's been protests out in front of the church. And so I think it's good for you to let local law enforcement know, public health authorities, that you're going to be resuming church services in accordance with the guidelines. Okay. Then what we're also going to send you, this is step 2. See, step 1, step 2, if we follow down the line, this is about preparing your facility. This is just because some ministries have, shut down their doors or locked down their facilities for a period of time. This is something that we have on the website that'll be going out to you. It's from Smart Church Solutions. Tim Cool leads that organization. They're the leaders on this when it comes to maintaining your facility. We've worked with them to put together kind of a reopening checklist. Give this to your facility team or your property committee for them to go through. And it's just kind of like, hey, have we been maintaining things? Are we ready to reopen? But this is something that you need to start as you're planning, because it might take a little bit of time. So it's 3 pages. A lot of it's common sense, but I think it's good to have that checklist for you. So that's number 2. Step number 3, and this is a response and contact tracing plan. This is if somebody does come down with coronavirus, and what it is it's what you should be doing to respond to them individually, how you respond to the local public health authorities, and really what you'll be doing is you'll be working with local public health authorities to have them do all of the contact. So when you're going to be doing this, as you're setting up a contact tracing plan, I talked to somebody this morning that had a positive coronavirus ID, and it was actually, I don't think I told you this yet, Dave, it was the person that was taking temperatures is the one that came back the next day with a positive ID. And so what they were able to do, because the church had a video that was recording everything, it happened to be in an area where it was all being recorded, they knew every single person that this person was in contact with. So they know who it was. This person had masks, they had gloves, and they were doing the temperatures. But this is part of your plan. It's different in each area. A lot of people have asked, do you have a model contact tracing plan? There's CDC guidelines, and what we're going to be sending you has a link to the CDC guidelines for a contact tracing plan. And then there's also going to be local public health authorities and states. So you're going to want to customize that plan. But really the gist of it is you want to have something in mind that if something were to happen, how are you going to get in touch with everybody, and how are you going to let the public health authorities get in touch with everybody that may have come into contact with that person that had coronavirus. People say, should we keep track of all attendees? I want to tell you, there's not clear guidance on something like that. Some people say yes, and other people say absolutely not. You don't want to have any contact with them. Tell everybody to leave their cell phones at home because somebody's tracking them if they come to the church. There's two completely different schools of thought on this. I think that most churches lean more towards, hey, we want to be able to keep track of the people that we're attending. We'll talk a little bit about a reservation system that can help. A sign-in, sign-out sheet for contact tracing could help. Or it could be the release form if your ministry chooses to use those release forms. It could be used for that. Okay. And right now they're only available in English. We don't have them available in Spanish, but you need to get them translated because you can't give it to somebody that at a Korean-speaking church service and say, hey, sign this. That's not going to be worth anything. But it's your call if you want to do that. It really is up to you. I think it's most important to keep track of everybody should something come up, that you're able to reach out to anybody that may have been in contact with the person. Okay. All right. That's step 3. Ready for step 4? This is our online reservation ticketing system. I went ahead and made one myself. That's why the guy is sleeping, because it's a church service where I would be preaching, which would put everybody to sleep, I promise. So it was pretty simple. It's free. You can set it up so that you have different groups. Like if you remember that church that had they had spacing where there was an individual seat, there were 2 people that were sitting there, there were 4 people. And so they had certain reservations that were available if you had 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, 4 people. So you can do that with the reservation system. If your ministry communication system that you have in place doesn't have that capability, Eventbrite took me 5 minutes to put something together, and I'd recommend taking a look at that. Okay. We're giving you model communications. You're going to want to put your church's culture, your church's voice behind something like this, but we kind of gave you the different areas that you want to address when you're reaching out to people. And so you would kind of insert church name. We'll be reopening our service. This is the date. We want to do it as safe manner as practicable. And you've developed a plan. I think that that's something that we want to explain to people what that plan is. I also feel that it's important if you've got a church that's going to be more than 100 people, normally, spaced out well. I think you want to be really careful because you want to hold space for those people that are really hurting right now, people that aren't finding their spiritual needs, mental health needs, things like that being met in your current environment. Like with me, I've always thought it's been great, but I'll tell you, it meant a lot going back to church. But I think you want to encourage people that are doing okay to stay at home for a little while. Also, talk to the people that are in a vulnerable category, that you want to encourage those people to stay at home. One of the problems is, what if you've got a pastor that's 65 years or older? What if he's diabetic or if he's immune compromised? It's a judgment call. I know, Dave, we had dealt with this just recently with the church, and I think the overall guidance has been, your church needs to make that decision. All right.
Correct. Yeah. The question that keeps coming up a lot in the Q&A is the word requirement. And it's important to understand that the history of this is a large group of churches, about 1,300, I believe, was in the process of determining to open up on Pentecost Sunday with or without permission from the governor, but they were able to create a dialogue with the governor, and the resulting dialogue resulted in this compromise of a limited or a soft opening as of the 25th of May. So from the 25th of May through June 1st, the guidelines and recommendations are going to be fairly strict. And it's
just a second, Dave, 1 second. You said June 1st. You mean June 21st?
21st, yeah. Thanks for correcting me, Charlie.
Okay.
So, it's imperative that we follow the guidelines as closely as we can in this period, because it's going to be reevaluated 21st of June. And if we can show and demonstrate the ability to control our crowds, to social distance, to use the guidelines, then we'll be able to, start opening up cafes, opening up bookstores, doing small groups, having larger gatherings. That's the intent. You know, so while there's the word requirement doesn't exist throughout the entire guidelines. However, we're suggesting all churches do as much as they can to adhere to these guidelines as much as possible. At the end of the day, you know, you lead your church, you're going to do what you feel led and called to do, and you're going to do what's in the best interest of your congregation. We just want to make sure that if you do this in the safest manner possible and as close to all the guides as possible.
And so when you go back to the word, Dave, about requirement, there's not many requirements. There are guidelines. And we've crafted this to follow those guidelines. And so the question comes back to, all right, you got somebody 66 years old, they're healthy as a horse, they want to come to church on Sunday. I think we leave it up to them.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and leave it up to the individual, leave it up to the church, leave it up to your pastor if you've got a pastor that's 70 plus. But I think that we want to give you some guidance on this. But I would encourage you to be as close to those guidelines as possible. Just seeing what a church has gone through with thinking they were doing everything right, and then receiving a call on Tuesday or Wednesday saying, hey, we've got somebody that had a positive ID, and just, I just think we want to be real careful in this situation. Okay. A little bit more of the communication, telling people what the guidelines are, or what you're going to be doing, what they can expect. And, again, it's going to be up to your church. We're asking people to go to the CDC self-checker. There's a link to it on the document that we'll send out to you. Have people wear a face covering. And have some available for others. This is where I say these will be required for all attendees. This is something that we're suggesting that you consider. Some churches are not requiring it, and some people are just saying, hey, if you feel comfortable with it, that's going to be up to you. My thought is, we've got till the 21st. Let's keep the masks on for a while longer. Talking to people about social distancing, and then also telling people that you've got a public health relationship and you're going to do contact tracing. And this is just a model for you. We're sending it over to you. And so this is step 5. This is the communication that we think will be helpful for you. And you want to tailor this to the culture of your ministry and the protocols that you'll be following. Okay. All right. This is number 6, as we talk about the things that you should be doing. We talked about kind of getting ready for your church to reopen. Now, these are the things getting ready for worship. And, what you want to do is kind of look through the church, how we can keep the flow going, how we can have people, not stopping, not gathering, so that there's a clear indication of the way that they should be going, not touching things, talking about taping off water fountains, marking spacing, things like that. These are part of the checklist that we have for you. I think the signs, people have asked about signs. The CDC has some model signs. The video that we provided has some signs that you can capture in there. I think that we want to have those signs that are reminding people to wear a mask, reminding people to socially distance. And so I think that those are some signs that I think will be helpful. Okay. Any other thoughts on this, Dave?
No, you pretty much covered it all, Charlie. I would add on the contact tracing or contact tracing. Some of the churches are using a combination of the event scheduling and having the waiver signed or agreed to the terms and conditions when they reserve, and that acts kind of as a dual phase contact and tracing, which I think is pretty clever.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Outdoor seating, had a lot of questions about that. And what I went to, remember, there were a lot of people that were coming out prior to May 25th saying, this is how you should do outdoor seating. This is how you should do drive-in seating or drive-in worship. I'll tell you what the guidelines say. The guidelines say that you should be doing the same thing outside as you're doing inside. Outside, you should have a group of 100 people. You should have people that are spaced out. I had one church that I spoke with, they had done tapes of squares, and they put out a bunch of squares, and people, household groups would sit in that square. But the protocols are, whatever you're doing inside is what you ought to be doing outside, and outside really should be, 100 or less in each grouping. Some of our ministries are blessed with a campus that's expansive, and you can have, groups like this all over, with maybe a video presentation or something like that. But you just want to look at your facility, look at your congregation, and see what's the best fit for you. With cars, I think, Dave, at your church, you sent me a picture of your church on Sunday, and you guys had it in parking spaces, and people were sitting in the parking spaces, right?
Yeah, we have 3 parking lots, so we had them park in one parking lot and walk through the empty middle parking lot, and then they brought their own chairs and blankets and stuff, and they sat in the parking lot and watched the service. And I think this week we're actually putting sod in the parking lot so they can sit on sod.
You're putting sod in the parking lot for them to sit in?
Yeah, they're putting some sod in the parking lot to give it a softer, cooler look, I believe.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. I love messy church. I mean, that's kind of the fun thing, is when we're coming up with creative ideas and, to gather. And so it's good. I think it's good to look for creative solutions like that. If you're doing it where people are sitting in cars, go to the old drive-in church service like Crystal Cathedral had years ago. It should still be every other parking space, and those are the guidelines by the state. And if you're not doing every other parking space and you have people right next to each other, then all the windows need to be rolled up. Why am I doing this motion? Our millennials aren't going to understand what this is. Dave, can you explain what that is?
Unfortunately, I can.
You want to make sure the windows are rolled up. Press the button, windows up. Okay, so you're going to want to make sure the windows are up if you have people sitting in parking spaces right next to each other. So really the same outside as you have inside. Okay. Also, one of the things that you're going to want to do when you're having people flow from the parking lot, sounds good like what your church is doing, Dave, where you had to go through one parking lot, from one parking lot, through another parking lot, to another one. You're having that directional flow where it's all going from one space to another. That's one of the key guidelines from the state and from the CDC, is that you don't have people going back and forth past one another. Okay. All right, step 7. This is kind of the key thing to me is when people first arrive, your security team, your parking lot team, they want to be aware of the fact that there could be different kind of traffic at the church. People just showing up saying, hey, what's going on? A lot of people are kind of bored right now. And if they hear that something is going on at the church, they may just want to come and watch. We want to have all of the parking lot. So security just wants to be aware that they should be on actually heightened alert. Even though you might be expecting fewer people, you want to just have them be on heightened alert and communicate with law enforcement. When I was reading about parking lot attendees wearing masks, I asked Dave, I go, Dave, why are they wearing masks? So where does that make sense? And I think as you've seen it at your church, people show up and they're just happy to see, to be back to church, and they're rolling down the window and they're talking to Dave. And Dave's he's a big dude, and he's sitting there and he's talking down. He needs to have a mask on. He needs to be clearly identified. And we don't want it where he's having his mask on and then he goes to talk and he pulls it down and he starts talking to him. No, you want to have that mask on the whole time because you're going to be talking down. And just assume that Dave, the church security volunteer, is going to be calling you on Tuesday saying, hey, I tested positive for coronavirus. And so we want to take those precautions that even the people that, somebody that's healthy as a horse, is just fine. We don't know that later on he's not going to test positive. And I've had this happen at multiple church services. And every church has said, gosh, some churches said, hey, we feel pretty good about what we did. Others have said, hey, we could have done more. Here's just some hints about directing people different sides of the parking lot, different traffic flows. So one of the things we talked about is having them park closest to the church and then going outwards, and then every other parking space with as much signage, cones, cordons, whatever it is that you can do to guide people to where they ought to be going. Something that I think is really key, if you recall that video, is you saw all the folks that were standing about 15 feet apart, and they were kind of guiding people. And these are the ushers and the greeters. Don't plan on training your ushers and greeters 15 minutes before church service, because first of all, they're going to show up late. But secondly, you want to make sure that they're well trained, because they're the key part to having people socially distance, and they need to understand how seriously you're taking it and the roles that they're going to take, because it's all going to be different. From a liability standpoint, from an insurance company standpoint, what we see is we see accidents happen when new activities happen, or you've got kind of new operations, because people aren't used to things. So it's really imperative that your ushers and greeters are well trained in what the protocols are going to be. You should have them guide on where they're going to be entering into the church. They should be doing a temperature check with the gloves and mask. And I use the wording here where it says in a discreet manner. That's because that's what the state has said. I honestly don't know how to do a discreet temperature check when you've got 100 people entering into an area. You just you don't want to be sitting there and I'm doing the temperature check for somebody, and then I'm yelling out to Dave saying, "Okay, Dave, Mary's got a 99.3 temperature." You don't want to do something like that. You want to do it just somewhat in a discreet manner. And then if somebody is over 100 degrees, you're going to find a way to ask them, politely not to come to church, and then make sure you're following up with them as well. Somebody had asked about having volunteers tested for COVID-19 beforehand. My daughter was tested yesterday because one of her coworkers came down with it over the weekend, and it was 5 days to get the test, and then it's going to be another 5 days to get the results. I don't think that you can have all of your ushers and greeters tested beforehand. I think that what you do want to do is have them go through that CDC self-checker, and we've got links to that in the program, and then also have a link to available checking on our website. Dave, you look like you want to say something.
No, you're good, Charlie. I was just
okay. All right.
I was going to add something about the temperature scanners, but I'll wait till we get there.
Okay. What the ushers should be doing, they should be kind of guiding everybody on their behavior. Hey, keep your mask on, social distance, tell them where to go, have everybody get hand sanitizer, have some Purell set up. Some of the machines are automatic. Some of the machines, they have to, it's just a pump. You're going to want to have them pump it, and then you're going to want to be regularly washing that as well. That might be the time that you're going to be having somebody signing an information sheet or a waiver of liability. Let's not pass that same pen to people over and over again. You're going to want to wipe down that pen each time, and there's guidelines for that as well. Okay. Any other thoughts on at the church, Dave?
No, I'm good, Charlie.
Okay, cool. Worship services. We talk a little bit about all of your communal things, everything that's being touched, whether it's, and on the website, on our website, we have some videos about setting up each one of the seats, that you're removing those things that would be touched regularly. If you've got a pew, all the stuff in the back of the pew that people might be touching, you should be removing those things. Anything that is touched, anything that is passed, should be removed. So communion, it's going to be the single serve cups, or however it is that you're going to be doing. And then passing of the offering plate. I think what the California guidelines is saying, you shouldn't pass the offering plate, but you should have an offering box at the rear of the sanctuary or somewhere in the sanctuary. You're going to want to see what the best one is for you. The key point is that you don't want something that's going to be passed. And then if you're going to be having worship, and talking about having live worship. Something that we've put up is an LA Times article talking about how choirs and people that are singing, these might be considered, I think the term that they used were super spreaders, that it's one of the most high-risk activity was singing in a group setting. So if your church decides not to do it on video, decides not to do it in some other way, and you say, hey, you know what, we want that worship experience. We want people that are a part of the worship team to be up there live and without masks on. You want to make sure that they're 20 plus feet away. You want to have them back as far as they can be with everybody in the congregation wearing a mask. And again, guys, this is not the future of church, I hope. This is through the 21st. We've got a couple more weeks to get through under these current guidelines. But so you want to have your worship team, your pastor, 10 plus, 20 feet away from the first group of people that are sitting, and then mask on, and then take when they're sitting, when they're speaking, when they're singing, you take the mask off, and then put it back on again. And then afterwards, you want to have the pastor direct people out a different entrance or a different exit than the doors when they came in. You want to keep that flow going from one point to another. They want to minimize the amount of touch that people are having, minimize the back and forth between people as well there. Okay, so it's step 8. Did I miss anything, Dave?
No, Sean, we did have a question. One asked, how do you handle people who are asthmatic and cannot wear a mask? And I think I'd circle back to 2 things. One, we want to encourage as many people who can and who are being fed to remain virtual for the short term. Also, a lot of churches have nurseries and child rooms that border the sanctuary if they're inside. And right now, those services are not open. So it might be a good idea to isolate people like that in one of those rooms where they could view and hear the service, but not be in the general population per se.
Okay. One of the comments that was made here about as the pastor is directing people to exit, it might be that you're having people released row by row. That was from Seton, and said, hey, what about having them row by row? That can be good as well. You know your facility better than we do. You know better than Governor Gavin Newsom does. And so what I think that you want to be doing is looking at kind of best practices, what works best for your ministry. One question that did come up about chair covers. Where did they tell us, Dave, about picking up the chair covers? You remember?
No, I'm checking with a couple different firms in the Riverside, San Bernardino area, but I haven't been able to find them either.
Okay. All right. That was a question that popped up here. Okay. But again, these are the guidelines by the state. We've seen a lot of things that are out there. I think that if we can focus on what the state guidelines are, then what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to, it's a little bit more manageable if you can go through this step by step. Okay. At the end, this is again your well-trained ushers and greeters. And I know some ushers and greeters, and they're usually the most friendly people, and they get distracted. And sometimes they're like a puppy, because they're the folks that are, so welcoming at the church. What we want you to do is, again, train them beforehand, and so that you can say, hey guys, it's really important that we keep this flow of traffic. This is where we want you to be before the church service. This is where we want you after the church service. We want to be pointing everybody after they leave the sanctuary, because people are naturally going to go to that place that they've always gotten coffee. That place where they've congregated, where they fellowship. It's different. So we want your ushers and greeters to be, facilitating that flow. Did I mention coffee? I did.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Well, some people have been saying, hey, can't do coffee at church. And actually, what the California guidelines are, they're saying you can do single serve coffee. So if you have people in gloves and masks, they were pouring coffee, they had them available, but then you can't have your little area where people are going to be, doctoring up and, putting all their sweetener and cream and stuff like that in a communal area. It would be kind of a single serve, here's your coffee. I'd probably just stick with, here's your bottled water. There's been, there's a lot of different things that you can do at your church, but the key to that is single serve and disposable. Okay. Step 10, this is something that I think is always really important, is getting everybody together afterwards that was part of that, that reopening team, and having them sit together for a while, socially distanced, spaced apart, masks on, but then say, okay, what should we do next time? What should we do differently? I think that you're going to learn a lot. I learned a lot by going to a few church services this Sunday on actually watching it done in person. I think that you'll learn a lot after you do it the first time, and then you're going to want to maybe revise your plan a little bit as well. A couple of other things. This comes up a lot about outside groups. I'll spend just a little bit of time on this. First situation is when you rent to an outside organization. Hey, a lot of people, their insurance may not cover them coming back at this point. So I think it's a good idea to get an updated certificate of insurance from their insurance agent, insurance company. And what it should say is, in the description, ask for something that says, you know, we're going to be coming back on June 14th. And so you want a certificate of insurance that says, you know, resumption of activities starting on such and such date. That way their insurance company is notified. You know that they've been paying their bill during this time as well. And I think it'd be a good idea to get an updated certificate of insurance saying, you know, referencing the first day of resumed operations. Also, you know, tell them, say, hey, you're a tenant. We're the landlord. You're responsible for your activities. You guys are going to follow all the federal, state, and local guidelines. We're having a tough enough time trying to figure out what a church needs to do the right way. Let them figure out what they ought to be doing. And then that release of liability form, I think that it's probably more important that if you have an outside group using your facility, then I would look at getting that release of liability form for all of their attendees for that outside group. And I think when you're also looking at this with your own small groups, actually the state of California guidelines have said, you know, small groups at the church are actually, they're encouraging them, as long as it's like 10 or less, or is it less than 10, socially distanced, faces covered, things like that. So this, I'm looking at the support groups that churches have. Your AA groups, your NA groups, not just a group to get together because they miss each other. Let's wait through June 21st. But if you've got people we're trying to fill their needs right now, I would encourage you to keep it in the small group guidelines, 10 or under, along with all of the socially distancing, the face coverings, and things along those lines. In those situations, that's where I'd really use the waiver for your small groups at the church. Again, we had a question come up about small groups in people's homes. Let me tell you, it doesn't matter if it's a small group in a home or if it's a small group activity at the church. It's still a ministry of the church, and you're ultimately responsible for what happens if it's in somebody's home versus in the church. So you're going to want to follow the same protocols between the two. Okay. Here's a question that came in. What if the events are outdoors? Does that change the recommendation on small groups? Kind of. I mean, it's still, you know, the guidelines in California are your face is covered and socially distanced. You agree with that, Dave?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's also important to note the type of building kind of impacts that as well. Older buildings with shorter ceilings don't ventilate as quickly or as efficiently as larger buildings with taller ceilings. So if you're in the older buildings with like lower roof lines, you may even want to restrict the occupancy a little bit more just because of the way the ventilation is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We talked a little bit about questions about handling 12-step groups, other tenants, how you should be doing it. The requirements are on the website, but as you read it, the requirements are saying, the state guidelines are saying small groups are allowed. They're actually encouraging more frequent meetings of smaller size than having general gatherings of people. One of the questions come up, are you required to have a protocol on site in case authorities decide to visit the church? I don't know that the authorities are going to visit the church, but you are required to have a protocol on site. That's part of what the guidelines say, is that you should have a plan for reopening, and you should have a plan for responding in the event there is a positive diagnosis of somebody. So you know, don't just open up the door and say, oh, we're all family, let's all get together. Let's have a plan in place. And that's why we sent you kind of that model plan, step by step, 10 stages through it. Do we need to review? They're asking us if we need to review the protocols before reopening the church. No, it's not an insurance it's not an insurance requirement. It's not an insurance guideline. I mean, if we didn't trust you to run your church properly, we probably wouldn't be insuring it. We don't need to approve it. We wouldn't be writing the insurance for you to begin with. We want you to have, you know, good common sense, a good program in place. If you need some help, we've tried to put as many of them available on the website as possible. There are videos about cleaning beforehand, cleaning in between services as well. There's some checklists that are available, and we'll be adding more and more between now and the 21st. Between now and the 21st, and then once the guidelines for the 21st and on come out, we'll be coming out with some more guidelines as well. Small group activities that meet in person, like I said before, it's the same as if it's happening on the church campus as if it's happening off of the church campus. And we have a couple of other questions that have come up here. Somebody says, how do you keep a fabric covered pew clean? Sydney, I mean, before coronavirus, I didn't know how to keep a fabric covered pew clean, to be honest. That's where you have coverings, the best that you can. Those are kind of the cleaning protocols.
And I believe some churches are also using like the aerosol disinfectant sprays.
Oh, okay. Okay.
As something rather than
Yeah.
something.
Here's a question from an anonymous attendee. What if events are outdoors? Does that change the recommendation on small groups? You got better ventilation. I think that it's, I'd encourage that best you can. Ventilation, are there guidelines for older buildings that don't have air conditioning or don't have ducting for a system? We have heat, but just open and close kit. I don't know. I don't know if we've come across that. Oh yeah, that's true. And fans and things like that. I'd have to look at that. I think that could be best be answered by Google for your. And you know what? I check with the local health authorities as well, Kit, and get their guidelines on that. Just knowing where your church is, it might be a little bit different than other areas.
And just make sure the fans are blowing out.
Yep. Question came up about suggesting on running a children's ministry during this time. Do we just scrap it all together? The guidelines from the state are you scrap it all together. And for church services. Some ministries are doing small activities on the church premises during the week, but as far as church services go on Sunday or Saturday night services, the guidelines from the state are scrapping those all together. I think we just need to wait through June 21st and just keep praying that things keep going the way that they are going, that we'll have some more flexibility here. Anything to help the air filter. Jake, if you read the website and the checklist that we have, it's got the checklist about managing your HVA system. Do you have that checklist of things done according to CDC guidelines? Not sure which things according to CDC guidelines. We have a link in the document that talks about the response plan, the tracing plan, which to me is one of the most important things that you can do, is have a plan in place for responding in the event that you get a positive ID. We have had a number of ministries that have called us up and said, we've had a preschool teacher that has contracted it. We've got a person working at a camp, a person working at a church. We've got a volunteer taking temperatures. All of these different things have come up. It's real, it happens. So I think those CDC guidelines for having that response plan and that contact tracing plan is one of the most important things to do. And that's the CDC guidelines that we have. And then, do we have to get electrostatic cleaners? I don't know on that one. I don't think so. So I don't think so. So, okay, hey, we've kept this under an hour. I really hope it was helpful. We're going to work hard to get this video put up on the website right away for you as a resource. We will be providing you with more guidance, more resources as they become available. We'd love to hear the feedback about where things went right and where things went wrong on church services on Sunday, what you've learned through this process as well, because we'd like to share that with other ministries. And as more guidance comes available, we're going to be sure that we provide those to you as well. All right, thank you very much. Dave, anything else to add here?
Yeah, I just like to add, Charlie, that as people that are active in our own churches and communities, we understand the need and desire to get back to church and open those doors. And these guidelines are somewhat counterintuitive to church people whose whole belief system is around community and human contact and compassion. But by adhering to these guidelines and doing this soft rollout, it puts our churches and our ministries and our communities in the best possible position to get to those other levels, so we can one day, very soon, hopefully, be back at church full steam ahead.
All right. Hey, thanks, Dave. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate you. We're praying for you and looking forward to hearing about how your churches are doing in these weeks to come. All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.